Warning: this video is for those who are of the age of 18 and over due to its nature of its content. I am a full believer in the fact that we are given everything we need to sustain our bodies while we're here on this planet. Fresh vegetables and fruit nourish our bodies and are useful for healing and preventing illnesses. Just as the edible plants that are given to us by the Creator to nourish our physical bodies, we also have plants that can provide spiritual nourishment. I would like to start this video by saying that overindulgence with any substance is a hindrance to our physical health as well as our mental and spiritual vitality. This video is for those who may be of the opinion that the use of entheogens are only used for recreational purposes and associate its use with sluggish and lackadaisical behavior. Hopefully, this video will clear up any misconceptions. Marijuana and hemp have been used for shamanic, religious, and magical purposes around the world for divination, meditation, trance rituals, prayer, and transcendence. There's a common misconception that hemp and marijuana are two different species of plants. They're just two different names for cannabis, a type of flowering plant in the Cannabiaceae family. Although science doesn't differentiate between hemp and marijuana, the law does. Legally, the key difference between the two is tetrahydrocannabinol content, which is known as THC. THC is one of the many cannabinoids or chemicals found in the cannabis plant. It's the one main compound that's primarily responsible for the high associated with cannabis. Entheogens are psychoactive substances that induce alterations in consciousness and perception to aid in spiritual development and insight. The use of psychoactive plants can be traced back to prehistory. Archaeologists have discovered evidence of the use of psychoactive plants dating back to at least 10,000 years. The use of the leaves in extract oil was used throughout the Middle East for centuries before and after the birth of Jesus. Cannabis is one of the oldest and most widely cultivated plants that many cultures valued as medicine and as a sacrament. It was used in conjunction with prayer in Vedic, Rastafarian, and Hindu traditions, just to name a few. The 20th century anthropologist Sarah Bennett Tawa, later known as Sula Bennett, claimed that the plant was used in the holy anointing oil of the book of Exodus. In 2020, it was announced that cannabis residue had been found on the Israelite sanctuary altar at Tel Arad, dating back to the 8th century BCE of the Kingdom of Judah. This suggests that cannabis was part of the Israelite rituals at that time. The Semitic cultures of the Middle East, such as the Hebrews, Assyrians, and Egyptians, burned cannabis as an incense for its intoxicating effects as early as 1000 BC. Several mummies, including Ramses II, contain traces of cannabinoids. Okay, shamanic and pagan cultures from other parts of the world use cannabis to achieve a form of enlightenment through psychic vision and to ponder philosophical subjects related to their tribe or society. It was sometimes used as an aphrodisiac during orgies. The Greeks believed that it had the power to eliminate anguish and sorrow. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, the Dacians and the Scythians followed a tradition where fire was made in an enclosed space and cannabis seeds were burned to ingest the smoke. There are three types of cannabis used in the Indian subcontinent. The first would be an edible form referred to as bhang, which consists of the leaves and plant tops of the marijuana plant. It is usually consumed as an infusion in beverage form and varies in strength according to how much cannabis is used in the preparation. Typically, bhang is the most commonly used form of cannabis in religious festivals. The second is called charas, or hashish, which consists of the resinous buds or extracted resin from the leaves of the marijuana plant. The third would be ganja. In Sanskrit, ganja is the term for female cannabis flowers that are unfertilized. Ganja was used as a remedy for the overproduction of phlegm and has been a cure for diarrhea from the 3rd to 8th centuries BCE and later used in folk medicine as an aphrodisiac and painkiller. The term ganja gained popularity when it was adopted by Jamaicans, specifically Jamaicans who followed the Rastafari movement, a religion that began on the islands in the 1930s. Rasta, another term for the followers of the Rasti movement, used ganja as a part of their spiritual practices. There are households in India that grow marijuana as an offering to the passing holy men, which is referred to as a sadhu. During evening religious services, it's not uncommon for cannabis to be smoked by everyone present. In the Tibeto-Himalayan region, cannabis played an essential role in heightening awareness in Tantric Buddhism. During special ceremonies, large doses were taken so that the climax of the euphoric feeling would coincide with the end of the ritual. The British biochemist, historian, and sinologist Joseph Needham concluded that hallucinogenic properties of cannabis were common knowledge in Chinese medical and Taoist circles for 2 millennia or more. Many scholars, including Joseph Needham, associated Chinese shamans referred to as Wu with the entheogenetic use of cannabis in Central Asia. Wu as a vocation was very common to the Han Dynasty. Keep in mind that in ancient China, as with many other cultures, medicine had its roots in magic. The entire plant was considered valuable for medicinal purposes and was often used as a surgical anesthetic. The Emperor Sheng Nung used cannabis for rheumatism and gout. The psychodynamic effects of cannabis were noted in the oldest texts of traditional Chinese medicine. To take too much makes people see demons and throw themselves about like maniacs. But if one takes it over a long period of time, one can communicate with the spirits and one's body becomes light of weight. In 1503, the Queen of France, Anne of Brittany, commissioned a special book of hours which would later be known as the Grand Hours of Anne of Brittany. This book of hours was a Christian devotional filled with sacred prayers and psalms written in Latin. The Grand Hours was truly a work of art with illustrations created by Jean Bordicon, who painted realistic representations of 337 holy plants, depicting both the male and female strains of cannabis. Although cannabis is mentioned in the Grand Hours, many point the actual use of it in France to the year of 1799, when Napoleon, along with his troops, went to Egypt and discovered the Rosetta Stone. Along with this remarkable finding, hashish was introduced to them as an alternative to alcohol, which was banned due to the strict guidelines of the Muslim leaders of Egypt. The troops were educated on the medicinal uses of hashish and brought it back with them for its pain-relieving and sedative effects. Soon it would become widely accepted throughout Europe for its medicinal value. By the 19th century, cannabis was considered useful and was prescribed by some doctors to relieve arthritic pain, menstrual cramps, and other common ailments. By the last part of the 1800s, the syringe invention became more useful for its fast-acting ability to relieve pain. Since cannabis was not able to be dissolved or injected, medical use of it declined. For the few medical practitioners who still continue to use cannabis for pain treatment, their actions came to a screeching halt in 1928 when the UK officially outlawed marijuana as a result of an international drug conference held in Geneva, when an Egyptian delegate argued that cannabis was the equivalent to opium. Therefore, his opinion was that marijuana would become a menace to society. From that point, cannabis was now an illegal substance, but recreational use continued in the jazz clubs of London in the 1950s throughout the flower power movement of the 1960s. Before leaving the topic of Europe, I wanted to mention the Irish physician William Brooke O'Shaughnessy, known for his scientific work in chemistry and pharmacology. He is recognized as popularizing cannabis in England and America for its healing effects. His research started with a voyage to India. There he researched numerous plants for their therapeutic qualities. Through his surveys and examinations, he discovered that the indigenous people had been using cannabis for medicinal purposes for thousands of years. O'Shaughnessy strongly believed that the contemporary medical literature of the West at the time was limited in knowledge of cannabis, since it was focused more on the intoxicating effects and provided no information of its medicinal qualities. He believed cannabis would make a useful addition to Western medicine and decided to put it to the test. He started to experiment on animals. He noticed that carnivorous animals invariably and speedily exhibited the intoxicating influence of the drug. However, graminivorous animals only experienced trivial effects from any dose that was administered. His overall conclusion was that not all species of animals were affected the same way with cannabis. O'Shaughnessy first presented his research in Calcutta in 1839. His presentation featured case studies of patients suffering from various ailments such as rheumatism, cholera, hydrophobia, tetanus, rabies, and a 40-day-old baby with convulsions. Although no permanent cures were made, it was discovered that cannabis could relieve pain for the chronic illnesses and afflictions such as rheumatism. It was also noted that those who suffered from hydrophobia and cholera were able to find relief by the calming effects and pain relief cannabis provided. O'Shaughnessy found success in quelling the harsh muscle spasms associated with conditions like tetanus and rabies. Today, many patients use cannabis for easing spasms and stiffness associated with conditions like multiple sclerosis. He believed that even if cannabis was not a cure, it could still be beneficial as a regular treatment to ease pain, relieve tension, and spasms. Sadly, the patient who suffered from rabies died from their condition. However, O'Shaughnessy concluded that cannabis helped ease their suffering. He wrote that the awful malady was stripped of its horrors. If not less fatal than before, it was reduced to less than the scale of suffering which precedes death from most ordinary diseases. O'Shaughnessy was successful in stopping the convulsions from the febrile seizures that the 40-day-old infant was suffering from, which led him to declare that the profession had gained an anti-convulsive remedy of the greatest value. In the present day, cannabis has become an accepted medicine to treat conditions like epilepsy in children and adults. Jumping over to America and Mexico, let's take a quick look at the natives' use of marijuana. In the 16th century, Native Americans introduced pipe smoking and tobacco to European colonists. It is speculated that the natives were exposed to cannabis through European colonists who brought it to North America from Africa and Asia. Each tribe had their own different view and use for marijuana, some focusing on its healing properties, while others used it for its spiritual qualities. Although each tribe had their specific customs, it seems as though they all made use of cannabis in rituals and for spiritual uses. The Teton Sioux tribe made use of the plant's sap to remove warts, and many Mexican tribes still regard cannabis as a sacred herb gifted to mankind from Santa Rosa. To them, marijuana is not just a plant, but an earth deity, seeing in it parts of God's heart. Although the Cherokee Nation does not condone the use of marijuana for medicinal or recreational use today, they have a legend that tells a story of cannabis being brought to mankind through the Star People. These beings were responsible for the education and enlightenment of humans. The Star People believed marijuana to be essential to the survival of the human species. The two types of cannabis sold and used for medicinal purposes are sativa and indicas. Sativa is known to have stimulating effects that can reduce anxiety and can be used during the daytime. Indica is used for its relaxing effects and can reduce nausea and pain. It's helpful for cancer patients since it increases the appetite. Because of its relaxation effects, indica is typically used at night. Cannabis growers produce unique strains from both indica and sativa, which result in what they call a hybrid. Hybrid cannabis are grown specifically to increase the THC percentage. This blend is mostly classified as either indica or sativa dominant or balanced or both. Hybrids are known for reducing anxiety and to ease the symptoms of chemotherapy. Hybrids can be used day or night depending on the dominant effects of the strain. Salvia divinorum, also known as seer sage and Scamarilla pastora, is a plant species that provides psychoactive effects when the leaves or its extracts are administered through smoking, chewing, or consumed as a tea. The leaves contain the potent compound salvinorin A and is known to induce hallucinations and provide a dissociative state. Salvia divinorum, or salvia for short, grows in Sierra Mixteca, Oaxaca, Mexico. It has a long history of use by the Mazatec shamans for religious purposes to facilitate visionary states of consciousness during spiritual healing sessions. Only fresh leaves from the plant are used for the rituals. They see the plant as an incarnation of the Virgin Mary and begin the ritual with an invocation to St. Peter and the Holy Trinity. Salvia use is not limited to spiritual purposes. It is also used as a diuretic and to treat ailments including diarrhea, anemia, headaches, and rheumatism. The word divinorum is derived from the word divine, which means proceeding directly from God. Divinorum in this case relates to the word divination, which is a two-way communication with deity, a way to receive answers. Opinions range from veneration of the plant as a spiritual sacrament to a threat to society. Negative reports filled the newspapers in 2007 when many young people were showing themselves getting high on salvia, which showed them slipping and falling all over themselves. Although salvia is legal in some states, some believe it should be banned as soon as possible. Psilocybin mushrooms, commonly known as magic mushrooms or shrooms, are a polyphyletic group of fungi that contain psilocybin, which convert into psilocin upon ingestion. Shrooms have and continue to be used in indigenous South American cultures for religious, divination, and spiritual purposes. Rock art from Tassili, Algeria is believed to depict psychedelic mushrooms and the transformation of the user under its influence. The hallucinogenic mushroom has a history of use among the native people of Mesoamerica for religious communion, divination, and healing. From pre-Columbian times to the present day, mushroom stones and motifs have been found in Guatemala. Hey, so for this part of the video, I just decided to come on here and do the video myself instead of following a script, okay? In this particular video, I know I'm talking about entheogens, so the ones that I'm talking about are the ones that I've actually used myself, okay? So I'm talking about marijuana, I'm talking about Salvia divinorum, and I'm also talking about psilocybin mushrooms, okay? So my first experience with marijuana was when I was about, I'm going to say maybe 16 or 17. Okay, I went to a friend's house and they were smoking marijuana. And at the time, I really didn't know how to inhale. I remember there was a president who was asked about marijuana and he said something about he tried it but he didn't inhale. And people were kind of laughing at him like he wasn't telling the truth or something. But whatever the case is, I do believe he was telling the truth because a lot of people don't know how to inhale when they are a certain age, because they're not familiar with actually smoking, taking it down to a certain level and then exhaling. So at that time, I really can't say that it had any effect on me, seeing as how I really didn't know how to inhale at that time. Okay, so I don't really count that, but I thought I would list that for the record because I'm sharing my experience. My actual use of marijuana, like consistently, okay, started in 1995. Okay, in the 90s, that was the worst time of my life. Like literally those years. I mean, I would say the gang stalking issue was horrible too. I can't really say which is worse. Okay, but I guess I really can't say which is worse. But I do think that my pain that I was dealing with in the 90s was extreme, okay? Things were falling down around me, and my father literally was basically gone. So at that year was the year that we put him in a nursing home, okay? And among other things, I was watching my father die. I myself had an uncertain future. I just felt like I didn't want to live anymore. I mean, like, I think that's a normal reaction, right? I was being gang stalked. I worked at a job in, I think, the Palmdale area, and it was not really much, okay? I was kind of working kind of like an under-the-table type job. Possibly, I'm going to say that because there was perp activity there, even though it was like far out,
out in the outskirts of town. I do believe it was probably arranged by a perp, okay? Because there was a lot of infiltration there. There was a lot of rude behavior and a lot of other things going on. I was feeling it because, I was dealing with, bullying, that kind of stuff, and just inappropriate behavior. What I mean by that is just stupid comments, rudeness in the workplace. There are not very many employees at that place, right? But still, I was dealing with rudeness, and I was obviously just done. Okay, so I was talking to my boss, and because I was always nervous and everything, he thought that I was doing drugs, right? I was actually nervous because of the environment, right? I had not touched marijuana at all during the time that I was working at that job, but he thought that maybe something was wrong with me, and I was actually nervous and dealing with, depression and everything else because of stalking. And now that I see this now, but anyway, he thought that. So he said, "What are you doing? Are you on drugs, right?" And I kept thinking, "No, I'm not." But as I was thinking, as I went home that day, I was kept thinking, "I wish I were. I wish I were," okay, because I was dealing with too much. Now, that's not an excuse to, don't take this as an excuse to go off the deep end and start indulging in anything, because that's not the point, okay? But these are just realistic things that people feel when they feel hopeless, when they feel helpless, when they feel like they just don't know what to do in it with themselves anymore. And that's exactly how I was feeling. So I remember I kept thinking, okay, how do I find, I knew kids like, because I was young. I was in my 20s, okay? I was a young parent. I was in my 20s. Just about everybody in my apartment complex, wherever I lived, okay, there was always young people. And I know that people would sell it, right? So I remember saying, I'm going to go get me some. I'm going to get me some marijuana. I figured I'd start with marijuana because it was like, at least natural. It wasn't like a synthetic drug like what, like maybe heroin or something. Like I didn't want to get into something deep, so I remember like going into like the apartment complex, and literally because I was nerdy, I was very nerdy. I didn't know the street lingo. I didn't know how to talk to people on the street because I'm not from the streets. Okay, so I walked up to someone in the apartment complex and I said, I'd like to buy some marijuana. And because I've always come off as very proper to a lot of people, they thought I was a narc. Okay, they thought I was a narc, and they were like kind of taken aback. And then they started talking among themselves, and the girl said, "No, she's not a narc." Okay, and the reason why they knew that I wasn't a narc is because at the time, and I'm going to admit my faults and my shames. Okay, at the time, I had my baby strapped into the back of my car. Right, he was in the back of my car, and I was, seriously trying to pursue this whatever, this substance. And so they were like, "Oh, you're a narc." And she's like, "No, she's not a narc." The reason why she knew that I was a narc is because if I was undercover or something like that, they're not allowed to bring kids around. You can't do that, okay? So she was like, "No, she's not a narc. She's just kind of nerdy," right? So they're like, "Oh, okay." So they sold me a dime bag, and I went home and I smoked it. Because by that time I was already smoking cigarettes. I already knew how to inhale. So I started smoking it. And I started thinking a lot. And I actually got some hallucinogenic effects from marijuana at that time. Now, a lot of people who start use marijuana for the very first time, they do feel it very intensely. Okay, and I would say when I first started using marijuana, I felt it very intensely. I actually had hallucinations, and that's not a very common. Like I said, it's not a very common effect on people. It doesn't really happen to everybody, but it happened for me. Now, maybe it could have been laced with something. I don't know. Because back then, that was illegal. You got it on the street. People could do whatever they want with it, whatever. So I remember enjoying the experience because it, for that moment, took me away from my problems, which seemed just like unreal, okay? So I think at that time in my life, because I was so empty, because I had so very little to live for, okay, at that time, I overused marijuana. I became a morning, noon, and night, let me smoke it all the time. I had to be high all the time, and because my pain was very, 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 very bad. And I would say though, my marijuana use when I was younger um, never interfered with need my need to take care of any responsibilities. Like if I was supposed to be somewhere at a certain time, I always was. It did not make me like slothful. Now that's gonna marijuana is gonna affect people in different ways. Just like I was talking about in the video earlier about the doctor Oceanasi, right? Tried it out on different animals, and found that the effects were different. It affects people different ways, and that's how it affected me. Okay. At that time in my life, I was a different person, meaning like I didn't know how to deal with bullying. I didn't know how to deal with, the frustrations that were going on in my family. I didn't know how to deal with, obviously, the targeting, because I would get weird reactions from people, and I never understood why. I mean, I understood people kind of tripped on the fact that, I was an intelligent person, but it was almost sometimes I started picking up on people ostracizing me, right? Kind of like treating me like I shouldn't exist or something. I couldn't understand it, okay? Now, mind you, during that time, there was a lot of people, because I lived in young neighborhoods, meaning like, I was in my 20s. The people who lived around me were in their 20s, if not maybe early 30s, okay? And a lot of these people in these apartment complexes were doing drugs that were far more, heavy, with more severe consequences. Now, some people would say marijuana is a gateway drug. Marijuana is a gateway drug. Anything's a gateway drug, okay? Anything is something that you can open yourself up to addiction to if you have some sort of imbalance in your life. And at that time, I will tell you, I had nothing but imbalance. And marijuana can be a gateway drug, like I said, if you're someone who, because people claim that there is nothing in marijuana itself, okay, to create the addiction. The addiction actually comes from, like I said, a lack of balance, contentment in your personal life, okay? So in this case, it's just kind of open. And because I was surrounded by people who were doing things like heroin and meth and everything else, and I refused to try any of that, I do believe a lot of them did start off with marijuana, okay? But some people hate their lives more than others. And I will say that those kind of drugs, to me, just have devastating effects, because I've seen like really nice looking people deteriorate to basically monsters. But back to the marijuana thing. I was out of control, but not just with marijuana. I was also out of control at that time with alcohol. I drank a lot of alcohol. I drank bottles of wine. Like I would drink Chardonnay, a whole bottle of Chardonnay wine, and that was pretty much how I had to deal with things. I had to block things out. Not the best way of doing it. Addiction is never the best way of handling your problems, but that's what I did. I was young, and a lot of times people don't know a way out. You can't suggest a good way out. At the time, now looking back, in hindsight, I didn't realize what I was up against, okay? So I literally didn't have a way out, okay? I didn't have a way out of, the targeting, the bullying, the harassing, because it was already something that was set in place. I literally had no way out. So it was either commit suicide or try to ease the pain as I go along. People make mistakes. That was my mistake, whatever, okay? But I was a very addictive personality. And on top of that, too, of my drinking, and I would drink like beer, wine. I remember somebody recommending or suggesting absinthe. I think that's what it's called, because they told me it had a hallucination effect on it. I was willing to take that. I was willing to take anything I possibly could that wasn't something that I thought was extreme, that would make me have to inject something in my arm or snort something up my nose. Okay, but some people would say that's pretty mild. I don't know. Whatever it is, all addiction is bad, right? In addition to my marijuana and my drinking habits, I was also a very, overweight person. I think the highest level of weight I ever got to was like 185 pounds. And everything in my life. I mean, I would eat whole pizzas and like to myself, and just like, get drunk, pass out on my bed, and just not give a shit. Just really didn't, I just needed to escape. I hated my life that bad. And I think, I know that when people, got around me, they knew that I was basically a pothead. You could smell it a mile away in my house. I needed that. But at that time, I felt as though I really needed that. Now, I have taken marijuana, of course, by inhaling it. I have also consumed it in food. Like, I remember the first time I had brownies was when my ex-husband convinced me to try them. And I had heard of them before. I just never got around to trying them. And then I tried them. And for me, ingesting marijuana could be dangerous for some people, because for a short while I did have experienced some sort of paralyzation on like the left side of my body, kind of like a stroke a little bit. And it affected me because I've always been the kind of person who gets up early in the morning. That day that I took them, I didn't wake up till 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Okay. I don't like the idea of ingesting marijuana. Now, I do know that they do have things like edibles at these dispensaries and stuff. I think it's probably a little bit less potent than what I had, but I have ingested marijuana through food. And I don't think I particularly care for that method. Now, what else did I want to say? In my present life, I do believe that I am a very balanced person. That is not something that happened overnight. It took a lot of discipline on my part, and then also because of my spiritual life. I mean, I do believe that marijuana is a good part of a spiritual balance, if you indeed have balance. And like I said, and I was talking about the cultures that use marijuana for religious purposes, for divination, whatever. They are using it in a way where it's being administered by like a shaman or it's a head of the tribe, and it's for ritual use only. Okay, it's not like they sit around all day and just get high. Okay, now I'm sure you find that in individuals in just about every culture who just sit around and use it for recreational purposes. But for now in my life, marijuana is pretty much reserved for relaxation, meaning like sleep and stuff like that. I don't necessarily need marijuana for meditation, but it can be used to heighten your meditation experience, which, some people find that very pleasurable. But in my modern day, I have become balanced because there's a lot of different principles that I adapted for myself that has allowed me to have balance. And the way that I see things has changed my life, okay? I no longer drink alcohol. Okay, I don't have, I don't sit here and eat like hordes and hordes I eliminated, fast food. I only eat fast food if I absolutely have to. Okay, there's certain things I have changed in my life. Okay, and but when it comes to being responsible with marijuana, I'm not saying to go out and try marijuana. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying is that marijuana, just like any other plant, can be used for, positive reasons. Also, I have used marijuana to study, to retain information. The Chinese used it also as a study aid, Marijuana for me today, like I said, is something that is pleasant, but it's not something that I feel like I have to have like I did when I was younger, okay? What else did I want to say about marijuana? I think it could be a good addition, like I said, it could be a good addition to meditation of all forms, through all forms of prayer. And like I said, you just have to have an open mind. Now, if you feel as though there's something in your life, and this goes for anything, okay? Like, you don't want to open that Pandora's box. You know what I mean? Some people might feel like, I want to try marijuana, I want to do this, but you have to ask yourself, whatever it is, okay? It might be something like even a piece of cake, okay? You've always been known to, you know, for example, you grew up in a family that was like, you know, they were vegans, and they also, not only were they vegans, but they really limited their sugar intake, and this whole thing, okay? And so you always, you know, at work, you're always seeing people eat sugary sweets, right? This is just an example. So then you, in your mind, you're like, well, you know, I want to go ahead and try these sugary sweets that I see my friend eating, but then you have to ask yourself, can this become an addiction? And if it can become, and you have to, the way that you can determine whether it can become an addiction or not is the satisfaction that you have in your life. Do you feel as though there's something that you have to run from? Maybe that's an unhappy thought. Maybe you hate your job. Okay? Maybe your family life isn't good. So you hate your job and your family. And sometimes when you feel that way, you feel boxed in, you feel trapped, you can't get away, you know you can't die. So the only thing you can do is take some sort of substance, right? This is how you feel inside. I'm just breaking it down, okay? If you feel that there's some discontentment in your life, that where you feel as though that's going to knock you off balance to create a habit, such as overconsumption of whether that be alcohol or that sweet treat that you're tempted to have in this scenario, right? Then don't do it. Then don't do it. Don't touch it. Okay? I've given the example of people who go out with a friend, right, to get drinks, right? There's really nothing really wrong with alcohol. It depends on how mature a person is and how they handle it. But like, you know, you might go out with a friend to have a drink, and you drink 2 drinks because you are so happy to just escape. You're away from the office, you're away from your home, you're away, and you're out with a friend, and you just want to just escape. So you have 2 drinks, right? And your friend, she just had 1 the entire night, and she's sipping on it the entire night. And by the time you guys leave the table, she's only not even halfway through. She doesn't need alcohol that way because she feels pretty balanced. I mean, it really does have a lot to do with the contentment that one person has in their life. And this is what determines what makes a person addictive and what people don't, what doesn't, right? So that's just the situation. Like, you know, you may need 2 glasses of wine or whatever, or drink or whatever, and this other person can take it or leave it because you feel as though you need to escape more. If you feel like you need to escape, whether that be dealing with food, alcohol, or drugs. Well, I don't like to use the word drugs when I refer to marijuana, but anything like that, then like I said, do not take it. Don't try it. Stay away from it. You know what I mean? And that's all I can say is to be responsible. That's all I'm saying. And it really does break down to whether you're content with your own life. Because if you're not content with your life, then that's when you're going to deal with addiction. So anyway. Now, in my present life, I will say that there's things I've experienced since the 90s that were a whole lot worse than what happened in the 90s. Okay, I've come to understand unraveling the whole thing that happened in the 90s, 80s, 70s, even the purpose of my existence. Okay, so since that time, I will say that there has been extreme empty feelings in me because, like I said, gang stalking wipes so much out of your life. It destroys so much, every aspect of your life. In this case, the way I feel, I do have a different outlook on life, right? I don't feel like I've admitted, hey, you know, when it comes to things here on this earth, I have very little to live for. Okay, like, you know, I love my son, but of course he's going to grow up one day, and he has already grown. But you know, I expect him to, you know, move on with his life and stuff. But it does wipe out those things, okay? Everything to me has become a struggle, you know? And so, but I also understand that I have my spiritual life, you know, and it's those times where I meditate, and I do think about the odd, the weird, the strange, and stuff like that. But do I run to marijuana to try to ease that pain? And in this, I'm going to tell you right now, I don't, okay? When it comes to this pain that I feel over this gang stalking issue, this nightmare that I went through, marijuana would only do one thing: burn me out. My thoughts on this issue are already burned out. It's already burned out. You know what I mean? So marijuana would only sit here and make me like dig into it deeper. And I don't want to dig that deep into it because it's a thought that literally is not pleasant on any level. Okay. So I don't have an addiction to the point of where I use marijuana to escape anything. Marijuana has its place. It's for those special times, when the times where I can't sleep or whatever. Okay. But marijuana to me is something that is a just like alcohol or anything else that somebody can actually become addicted to. It's something that you have to be careful for. You have to be responsible for yourself. Okay. Also, I do want to say that it's important to practice safety. Some people might want to have the idea of bringing over their friends and smoking and partaking. That's all very well and good. But just like when, a person is drinking or whatever, if they're leaving your house, make sure that they have some sort of provision. I would suggest just having them spend the night, put a cot on the floor, let them stay the night or whatever. Don't let them, drive under the influence, because driving under the influence, whether it be alcohol or marijuana, is going to get you in trouble. Okay, nobody wants a DUI. Okay, so next thing is I want to talk about Salvia divinorum. I have tried that. I tried it in 2008. That was when I first started, and it was a result of me reading a bunch of different articles, a lot of newspapers, which I mentioned in the video earlier, about how people were talking about the dangers of it. And I was literally kind of like not caring a whole lot, because in that year I was working in Chatsworth, and it was another nightmare hellhole of a job, and I was still dealing with forms of addiction. I was still drinking at that time. I was still doing a lot of things I wanted to get out of my mind. Okay, so I was reading about the dangers of salvia. And but I also realized, because I looked it up in my book, as I had an encyclopedia of different herbs, and it was talking about it's Salvia divinorum, right? And the word divinorum is derived from the word divination. So I obviously knew that it had its roots in magic, right? So that kind of added to the allure of it. So I did go down to like a cigarette shop. I'm starting to shut this window. The dog next door is barking. All right, so I did go down to a cigarette shop that I knew sold like paraphernalia and stuff like that. And they had salvia. So they had different lengths of it, different, not strains, I guess. What would you call it? Levels, I guess, levels of salvia. They had the low dosage, medium, and high dosage. I immediately purchased the medium and the high dosage. And what was recommended is that you actually try the salvia, the lowest dose first, okay? Because salvia will knock you off your loop, okay? It will do that, all right? I didn't care about that. As a matter of fact, I didn't even care about living at all. So I just went ahead and purchased the medium and the high dosage. Yeah, that's what I did. So I did that, and I went home. And it was a Friday night, because I knew I didn't want to do that stuff like on a night that I had to work. Okay, I was somewhat responsible, and salvia is legal. Okay, so it's not like my employer could sit here and bark at my ass for using it or whatever. So I did. I took it. What they recommend is that you sit down. Okay, it says it on the package. If you're going to use this, you want to sit down in one spot and not move. Okay. And the reason why is because you literally lose your ability to do anything. You lose your concentration. Possibly you might be able to lose the ability to speak. I was able to speak in some of my little salvia trips or whatever, but it literally, the reason why kids were filming themselves on these salvia trips back in 2007 is because, it of the effect that it has on them. Like, they were literally falling all over themselves. This is one of the reasons why they tell you to sit down, because if you're standing up, you're going to be falling down. So anyway, I got the salvia. I sat in my room, and it also on the package recommended that you have a person with you. Okay, I live by myself. My son was out visiting his friends, so I was by myself. And like I said, I didn't care back then. I really didn't care if I lived or died. Okay, even though I didn't really feel like my life was in jeopardy, but still, it's like I honestly had very little value for my life based on the bullshit that I had to deal with. So I really didn't care. But anyway, I did go ahead and do it anyway without the little supervisor there. And my experience with salvia, it felt like they called them Vision Quest, okay? When I'm referring to I believe it's the Mezteca. I mentioned them in the earlier part of the video. They're Vision Quest, okay? And this is basically what I was doing, right? But my Vision Quest was very weird. My first salvia experience, it felt like somebody was pushing me down. I felt like I was a Lego piece. I felt like I was a Lego piece blossoming into something fuzzy. Something fuzzy. And that a bunch of like bricks and stuff were stacking all over me is what I got. Now the salvia trips last anywhere from 3 to 10 minutes, okay? I don't know how long mine lasted. I should have recorded it, but the thing about salvia is the result of it is instant. That, because sometimes, like, if you're smoking weed or something, you might smoke it and it might take, a couple of seconds, maybe a minute or two for it to kick in. Salvia, the minute you inhale it and exhale it, you're pretty much like already gone. And so, but I didn't really get any spiritual message from this. Now, I remember telling this other girl that I met about my salvia trip, and her interpretation is that I was the bricked in part. She interpreted as, you feel like you are dealing with something that you can't get out of. And I did feel trapped. Okay, that could have possibly been the real interpretation. I don't know. Okay, but the other salvia experience I do remember is when my ex-sister Lisa came over to my house, and I encouraged her to try the salvia, and we did share a common thought. Salvia does it's the divine type thing. Okay, where I thought I was on the bus. A bus. I had a salvia trip that I was on the bus, and then my sister Lisa thought that she was on the bus, and then we started laughing, and it was pointless, really. But I did actually link our brains together for a short period of time. So anyway, I have not tried salvia or used salvia since then. I haven't come in contact with it. It is legal here in the state of California. I don't know if it's legal in other states. I have not kept track of all of that. I'm just telling you my experiences, okay? Now, when it comes to the mushrooms, I've been using mushrooms off and on since the 90s, and the funny part is I cannot remember exactly where I tried them. I think they came, the first time I tried them was when I was living, I think, in Rosemont. And there was a guy that came over, and I remember, I don't know if that was the first time or the other time. And I'm usually really good at remembering those sort of things, but this time, I must have been doing it so often that I don't really remember. Okay, but let me tell you my experience. Mushrooms are very similar to LSD, which is considered like a psychedelic, okay? But LSD, yes, I have tried LSD, but I'm only talking about plants of the mind, okay? So I'm not bringing in LSD, but mushrooms are very similar when it comes to like what you can see, the hallucinogenic effects. The only difference is that mushrooms last less. They're not as intense, and it doesn't last as long. Okay, but they can last. I would say a few hours. It can last a few hours. Now anyway. My experiences with it just kind of intensifies things. You might notice something that you haven't really paid attention to before. Like I remember took some mushrooms. I went over to my mom's house. I grew up in that house, okay? And then all of a sudden I started looking at the wall. I'm like, Mom, that clock. She's like, Maria, that clock has been there since me and your dad and I had that clock since we were married, and it's been in every house that we lived in. It's a bit on the same wall, whatever, but then you start noticing, like, wow, you start noticing things that you didn't notice before, okay? When it came to any sort of spiritual insights in mushrooms, I can't really say that I've ever had any sort of spiritual insight, like, that it made me think or increase my psychic vision, which everybody knows I have, okay? I will say that it does allow you to see apparitions, at least for me. Like I said, everybody's body chemistry is different. I was able to see apparitions with mushrooms. Okay. Now, like I said, going back to the issue of being balanced and being responsible as an adult, I did want to say that another way of consuming mushrooms is through drinking tea. Okay, I have used mushroom tea. Basically, I put hot water on it, and I just like in one of those little, I don't know, Turkish coffee type makers. What I usually do use. And put the mushrooms in there, and then I add the water, and then I let it stay for a couple of days. I usually mix it with like a juice or my tea or whatever, and then consume it that way. And the effects are very subtle, and it actually can last a very, very long time. I would say you could have a what do you call it, a spiritual type high, I guess, for at least maybe anywhere from 3 to 4 hours. Now. What else did I want to say? Is there something else I wanted to say about? I do understand that people will always judge you based on things that you used to do, or things that you do, or things that you did, or whatever. And I think that I can see that I had a very difficult past, and I think that I've learned from a lot of my mistakes. I think that I grew up to be a pretty responsible person, and I do have a different outlook and view than most people. But when it comes to the use of any sort of substance, I do think that people should be responsible. They should know what they're getting into. And, like I said, it all depends on how responsible you are. You probably do drink, right? And as long as you practice that sort of safety, all I can say is, that's up to the individual, okay? This is not me encouraging it. It's not me discouraging it. It's just basically me talking about my experiences. So like I said, be very careful when it comes to things like driving behind the wheel, that kind of stuff. And then also, like I said, you don't want to take on a habit if you don't have to. So anyway, I'm going to wrap up this video. The reason why I kind of rushed through this video is because, I've got other video content that I need to be making, and I think I'm really behind on schedule when it comes to what I need to be posting on Patreon. I have not checked my Patreon account, you guys, yet, and I'm hoping that things get cleared up as soon as possible. Right now, I am encouraging people to support me on Patreon. I would really love to have you. I will not be talking about drug use or anything like that on Patreon, but I will be talking about, just helpful information. Anybody who's interested in the occult, who wants to utilize the natural things that we have around us to improve their life, I would encourage you to go ahead and support me. And I do want to say thank you to my Celebrity Soul Tribe who have been supporting me. And then also the other VIP people who do support me. I do appreciate your help. I'm going to wrap up this video, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye-bye.